One of the greatest challenges that businesses face today is how to keep employees engaged and committed to their organisation. Employees with high organisational commitment exhibit a greater desire to realise the company goals and to remain in the company. They give companies crucial competitive advantages, such as higher productivity and lower employee turnover. So what is organisational commitment? Organisational commitment is defined as a psychological state that is representative of an employee's relationship with the organisation and influences the employee's decision to remain employed at that particular organisation. The three most found organisational commitment definitions are the strength of an individual's identification with and involvement in a particular organisation, psychological attachment felt by a person for the organisation, and it will reflect the degree to which the individual internalises or adopts characteristics or perspectives of the organisation. A psychological state that binds the individual to the organisation, making turnover less likely. Researchers disagree whether commitment is an attitudinal or behavioural phenomenon. A three-component measurement of assessment was developed by Meyer and Allen in 1991 to measure organisational commitment. And according to this theory, commitment is multidimensional, and there is in fact three distinct and separate constructs of organisational commitment. You continue working for an organisation because you have an emotional connection and a desire to remain there. This is known as affective commitment. Or you continue working for an organisation because you face pressure from others to remain and you have a sense of moral obligation to maintain membership. This is known as normative commitment. Or you continue working for an organisation because you cannot afford to leave. This is known as continuous commitment. So, affective commitment describes the extent to which an employee wants to be part of the organisation. Continuous commitment describes the extent to which an employee feels they need to remain at the organisation. Normative commitment explains the degree to which an employee feels that they ought to remain at the current job. These three dimensions are not standalone. A committed employee could reflect all three of them. This construct and the way it's measured by Meyer and Allen is now well recognised. It's recognised that commitment is a multidimensional construct, and the three-component approach to commitment is now considered the most dominant method of conceptualising organisational commitment. So let's take a look at the development of this organisational commitment scale. Meyer and Allen attempted their three-component model in an attempt to integrate existing unidimensional conceptualisations, such as the ones by Maury, Steer and Porter, along with Becker's conceptualizations of the side bet theory and investments. They integrated all the previous conceptualizations of commitment into the three separate constructs of effective, continuous, and normative commitment. Antecedent variables such as specific personal characteristics, work experiences, and organisational structures have been shown to correlate well with effective commitment. On the other hand, other personal characteristics, alternatives and investments or side bets have shown to influence continuous commitment. Other personal characteristics, socialisation experiences, and organisational investments have been shown to affect and correlate well with normative commitment. Not only do the antecedents predict each of the three commitment constructs, but certain consequence variables also relate to each of these three commitment scales. Effective commitment is shown to influence retention and turnover intention. Continuous commitment has been shown to influence productive behaviour and performance, as well as absenteeism. Normative commitment is shown to influence employee health and well-being. So let's have a look at each of these scales and their items. The face validity of the effective commitment scale shows items that reflect a happiness to stay, personal meaning, being part of a family, being emotionally attached, and a sense of belonging to an organisation, with some of those items being reverse scored. The revised scale simply removed the final 2 items, leaving the top 6 items unchanged. One of the criticisms with the effective commitment scale has been made, and that the first item lacks the proper item content structure. And it is suggested that this new item should actually replace the first item. The face validity of the continuous commitment scale shows items that reflect how hard or costly it would be to leave the organisation, or having too few options or available alternatives, and the necessity to stay, and how it would be a personal sacrifice to leave the organisation. The revised scale kept the first 5 items, with the addition of 1 item putting in the personal effort into the organisation. The continuous commitment scale was then further revised to actually match what research had been showing, with the distinction between the low perceived alternatives and high personal sacrifice. The face validity of the normative commitment scale shows items that reflect a sense of obligation or loyalty or ethics for remaining within an organisation. The face validity of the revised items focus more specifically on the feelings of obligation without actually specifying the source. With the organisational commitment scale, this is typically measured on a 7-point Likert scale, from 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree. A common modification is to alter the response scale to a 5-point Likert scale. This has worked quite well, but the authors discourage anything lower than a 5-point scale. Advice from the authors is to also present the items in a randomised order. A study in Australia has used the 3-component model of Meyer and Allen's organisational commitment scale. The sample consisted of 505 Australian male firefighters. The purpose of this study was to test the multidimensionality of the organisational commitment. The results indicated that organisational commitment is best represented by 4 factors of effective, normative, low perceived alternatives, and high personal sacrifice. That is, continuous commitment is better represented by 2 separate constructs. All of these 4 factors were found to be differentially related to a set of antecedents and consequences. Some consequences that they looked at included turnover intentions, absenteeism, and acceptance of change. In regard to the antecedent variables, it was found that firefighters experienced different personal, job-related, and environmental causes of commitment depending on whether they feel that they want to, ought to, or need to remain within the organisation. In regard to the consequence outcomes, as expected, not all facets of commitment enhanced organisational effectiveness. Effective commitment was found to be the most beneficial. Firefighters who exhibited emotional commitment were less likely to leave or be absent from the organisation, and were more accepting of changes. Similar to effective commitment, the firefighters also exhibited normative commitment. With that kind of commitment, they displayed as a lower propensity to leave and be absent from the organisation. Continuous commitment was found to be the most detrimental. Those firefighters that exhibited low perceived alternatives, a subscale of continuous commitment, were less accepting of change. Alternatively, those who perceived a high level of personal sacrifice were less likely to quit. These different consequences have important implications for the management of commitment. The value of commitment to an organisation depends on the nature of that commitment. So what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the organisational commitment scale? Well, looking at some of the strengths, we see that the Meyer and Allen 3-component measure offers a more holistic perspective of commitment because it has 3 distinct commitment forms. The advantages also include good psychometric properties of the scales, acceptable discriminant validity of the 3 dimensions, acceptable content validity. And the distinction between the types of commitment is important because not all types of commitment may be beneficial to organisations. And because it's not unidimensional, employees can actually express degrees of all three scales. Some of the weaknesses of using this organisational commitment scale, as mentioned before, is the conceptual ambiguity of continuous commitment and whether it should actually be two subscales. And also the concept redundancy between normative and effective commitment in that they correlate highly, and perhaps maybe with just the one measure. There are also some limitations about the predictive validity of the organisational commitment scale. So in conclusion, the model by Meyer and Allen has become dominant, and it's a great measure for studying workplace commitment. Evidence has shown that across a number of years and a number of meta-analytic studies that the factor analysis, antecedent and consequent variables, does actually suggest that this three-component conceptualization of commitment has some merits and should continue to be used today. The three-component model is distinguishable from one another, and it's distinguishable from other characteristics such as job satisfaction, job involvement, and occupational commitment. All three forms of commitment have been shown to relate negatively to turnover, yet they have related differently to other measures of work-related behaviours, such as attendance, in-role performance, or organisational citizenship behaviour. It is good for the company to have employees who are effectively committed. Normative commitment also improves on-the-job behaviour, but not to the same extent as effective commitment. On the other hand, it's not good for companies to have employees who are purely continuous committed, those that are only in it for the money or have little alternatives. This doesn't result in optimal performance outcomes. Understanding employee commitment is important for organisations. Companies need to acknowledge that individuals can exhibit different types of commitment, and not all types of commitment are beneficial. Measuring this through a multi-dimensional approach, using Meyer and Allen's organisational commitment questionnaire with the revised items, is strongly recommended.